I am so excited to have you on the show. I love your books. You have carved out such a fun career for yourself. You get to just go and explore all these interesting worlds and sort of you know, go onto gravity defying devices, and I don't know, you just get to, it seems like a lot of fun what you do for a living. Do you enjoy it?
It's crazy fun. It is great. It's I keep always thinking that like somebody's going to find out what I'm getting away with.
They're going to be like, man, you're not allowed to have fun anymore. You're having way too much
fun. Something got past us. You're going to have to find a different career. This is just not allowable, this much fun. It is very fun.
I want to kind of understand how you got into this, because I was interested. I was doing a little research on you, and you weren't really like a science geek as a kid. You weren't like a big science writer person like early on. To tell me a little bit about the origin of your career. Like, how did you get into where did you start? Like, where did you start your professional career?
I started my professional career
as a writer, I should say.
Yeah, as a writer. I had a job working in the public affairs office of there was the zoo, but before the zoo was the SPCA. So I had a job writing press releases and this regular feature called Pause for Applause, PAWS, and a column in the local paper called Pet Tips.
Okay, so you were like a pet expert at that point.
Yeah, I was just really doing just filler. But the thing is, I was so excited to have that job, partly because I didn't study journalism. I didn't even do any writing in college, and I graduated in the middle of a recession. And I thought, well, writing sounds kind of fun. I don't know. And I quickly came to see that the jobs were in either advertising or marketing or publicity. So when I got one, I was absolutely thrilled. It paid terribly. It was the kind of job where they'd send you this little memo, like the hidden paycheck. Your health insurance is worth this. I know we're only paying you $800 a month.
Right. But here's where it's going, right? They have to explain it to you.
Yeah, they have to explain it to you. So you're like, oh, that's not so bad. But I was actually thrilled to be, because again, I had these reporting assignments, like go and like there was a new dog wheelchair where you would strap it to the back of the dog and the dog would roll along. So I would interview the people who made the dog wheelchair, and I don't remember the name of the dog wheelchair. I'm sure it was very clever. And so, and I'd write up these press releases or sometimes things for the newsletter, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. It was, really
there could be worse beats than the animal pet beat, I guess.
The disabled pet beat.
The disabled pet beat.
It's very niche, very niche.
Very niche, but like we always encourage people to carve out a niche for themselves. Disabled pets might be a thing.
Yes, I started there, and then I didn't last long there because it's a long story. But there was a job at the zoo, part-time.
What's the zoo? Oh, like the actual zoo?
The San Francisco Zoo. Yeah, okay. This was all in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So actually there was the San Francisco Zoological Society, which was the nonprofit that supported the zoo. And again, writing press releases and articles for the membership magazine. And I worked in a little trailer by Gorilla World, and I got to write, and I loved it. But it was a half-time job. And eventually they wanted it to be full-time. And by then I had started freelancing, and I really was enjoying it. I was freelancing for the San Francisco Sun Chronicle Sunday magazine. Short pieces, mostly, nothing particularly meaty, but I was really enjoying it. And I didn't want to go to full-time publicity and PR because I'm not really cut out for publicity and PR. PR is very much, you need to know how part of the job is manipulating the press and getting them to say what you want. And so at some point a reporter called and said, we heard a rumor that the cheetah was sucked dry by fleas. And instead of denying that, instead of saying, well, that's ridiculous, and where did you hear that? And I was like, whoa, how many fleas? Let's figure this out. How much blood does the average flea take for its blood meal, and how many fleas would that be, and how much blood is in a cheetah? And is this possible? My boss was like, what
are
are
you
you
doing?
doing? Just
Well, that's how your
deny
mind
it.
works, huh? I mean, your
That's
mind
how my
works.
mind works. Yeah. And that's not the mind of a good publicity person.
Well, I'm
So
glad
that
that
was
you
neat. That
chose.
didn't last long.
So I'm glad that you chose. So what were you writing for the Chronicle at that time? Were you writing more disabled pet stories?
No, that was mostly, there was a section called diversions. So it was things going on in the Bay Area that people could go and do, kind of not so much culture and arts, but there was also some front of the book stuff. Nothing, again, no big significant feature stories.
And
Like
no
I went,
science, really.
no science. I remember going out with a pothole patrol one day, things where I, again, like be able to go out and do things and step into these little strange worlds. I kind of enjoyed that, but no science. The science came when an editor from the San Francisco Chronicle went to this magazine. She took a job at a magazine called Hippocrates, which was health and medicine and science. And it was a really good magazine, and it was really smart and it was really fun. And I, as quickly as I could, got myself signed on as a contributing editor, which meant I had a contract to do a certain number of stories. And that really started me on the path of reporting about the human body and science in general from Hippocrates, which changed names over the years. That led to some writing for Discover magazine, which still, I believe, still exists. And again, those stories, I didn't have a background in science, but I'm writing for an audience that may not either, so it wasn't that much of a liability. And they were all really interesting, and there was a lot of science goes on all over the world, and I really enjoyed travel, so I tried to set up stories that would take me.
I remember those kinds of assignments that myself.
Take me to far-flung places. So that's kind of how it went. Just pretty random.
Yeah. Well, it sort of seems like you fell into it, but it was always the sort of common thread always seemed to be that you like to go and explore things and you were curious. And you like to leave your desk and go, because a lot of reporters will just, phone it in literally, but you want to go in the field.
I wanted to, exactly. To me, this job is this magic key that lets you step into all these worlds that otherwise you wouldn't have really any cause or way to step into. Just being a reporter, writer, author, whatever you want to call me, science writer, is this wonderful access pass, and so it's endlessly interesting. And I have a short attention span, so it's not like a career in science would have been quite right for me either.
Yeah. Well, so what was your first book? Stiff was your first book. Okay.
The
that was about
cadavers.
Yeah,
cadavers.
That was cadavers. I said cadavers. And like, how did you in a million years come up with that idea for a book?
I know. Kind of
random, kind of odd, kind of dark.
Yeah, that happened because at that point I was writing a column for salon.com. That was the time, very exciting. It was the first online magazine, Salon and Slate.
I remember Salon and Slate. Yeah.
Oh, it was really exciting. Online magazine. So I had a column for them, and that happened partly because David Talbot, one of the founders, used to be at the Chronicle. So I knew him from there. And just when he was handing out columnist gigs, I immediately contacted him and said, me. Yeah. And amazingly, people say yes to things. I'm always telling writers starting out, just ask someone.
That's all you have to do is ask.
Well, sometimes, yeah. I mean, if you don't ask, you definitely won't get it. So it was a funny, kind of quirky reported column that had to do with the human body and research and science and the kinds of things that I had been covering, only a little bit further into the fringes than I could have done elsewhere. And there were a couple columns that had to do with cadaver research. And around that time, an agent had contacted me, the agent I still have, and said, what do you think about doing a book? And I was like, I was almost like, are you kidding? A book? That's really big.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
I've never written more than a 5,000 word piece, really. And he said, well, you should think about it. And he was very, I was able to kind of dip a toe in, he'd say, just start with 1 or 2 pages. And he was the one who said, look at your column hit rates, like how many clicks essentially were these different columns getting. And the cadaver ones had a pretty high hit rate, like, which suggested that there was interest there. And he's the one who said, what about that? And I was like, that's a terrible idea. Who would buy a book about cadavers? Why would anyone read that book? He's like, I just think about it. And so I did. I kind of thought about it, made some phone calls, poked around on the internet, and wrote a 2-page sort of almost like a treatment. And he looked at it and said, no, let's do a proposal. Why don't you write a proposal? And I did. And he shopped it around. And strangely enough, there were a number of publishers who were interested in it. And that's how it happened. It was not a topic I ever, I was interested in cadavers to the same extent that I was interested in any of the other things I wrote about for Salon. It was just one more thing that I stumbled onto and thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, and then moved on. But apparently there was an appetite.
There's a huge, from disabled pets to cadavers. You find your niches.
I do, yeah.
But it's interesting because you like to go out in the field. So once you did Stiff, then your next books are very different. So it's not like, so how do you come up with the ideas for your different topics, and they're always unusual worlds that you uncover. They're not like your run of the mill world. So what is it? Like, how do you know that there's a book in that?
It's largely intuitive. For example, I'll tell you, when I wrote Bonk, that happened kind of in a moment. I knew that was going to be the next book. Bonk was a book about research into sexual physiology, which is, as a science, an awkward thing to pursue. You've got to bring people into a laboratory setting and have them do sexual things and hook them up to machines and record them and watch them. And that is just very Mary Roach territory. And the way that came about was I was, for some reason, looking at an article in Film Quarterly, which to this day, I was like, why was I reading Film Quarterly? I must have been in a waiting room or something. I don't know. I don't read Film Quarterly,
right.
But there I was reading Film Quarterly, and there was it was a kind of a scholarly academic essay piece, and it had a reference to the colposcopic films of Masters and Johnson. And I remember thinking, colposcopy, I had a memory of that being, taking a biopsy of a cervix, like that's inside the body. And I thought, holy shit, these people made films inside a woman's body. And I thought, well, that of course kind of makes sense if you're trying to document arousal. And I remember in that moment, I thought, well, that's the next book.
That's the book.
But it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes it's months and months of kind of heading down in one direction and realizing that that's not, the access is going to be a problem, or there's not enough material, or it's not as interesting.
So you don't know, not all the ideas you have come to actual fruition. Like, what are some can you share a book idea that you might have had that didn't actually pan out?
Yeah, sure. I had this idea, and I spent a couple of months trying to make the logistics happen for this. I wanted to do a book on natural disasters and the immediate aftermath, the science of like rescuing people from rubble and that sort of thing, and the dogs that do it, and it's all kinds of very specific niche science for the aftermath of a natural disaster, and also depends on the natural disaster. So, earthquake is different from flood, is different from hurricane. So, and then also preparedness and prevention, like that. Like there were lots of directions to go in, but the piece that I really needed was I would need to be on the scene in the immediate aftermath of a large natural disaster. And I thought, oh, I'm sure I can figure that out. Well, when you think about that, there's maybe one a year that's a really significant big, and it's often in some far-flung part of the world that you need to get there fast. Often the airports are shut down. There's no where are you going to stay? There's a lot of emergency responders who are there, and really any resources that are available, rooms and food, should go to them.
Right.
And I'd be competing for access with other daily journalists. And the other thing that goes on is a lot of times there's sort of what's called an incident command system, and you as a writer are just part of a press pool, and you can't be climbing around on the rubble with somebody. First of all, it's dangerous. Second of all, that's not the way it works on a scene of a natural disaster. So to do the kind of thing I like to do, which is be sort of involved and right in the midst of it, I thought about trying to volunteer, but then it's like for the next 2 years, I'd kind of be on call with a bag packed, and where would I go and how would I get there? So I was talking to Doctors Without Borders and the International Red Cross and the military, and I managed to get someone at a local in California, one of the air bases, military air bases, to say, we will take you there, and you can cover our work. Said it would, they'll often set up an emergency runway tarmac for planes coming in delivering supplies. And but then they're like, well, we can't find you anywhere to stay. We can't get you out of there. We can't promise you access to anything else. So after a couple of months of dead ends, I finally gave up. So
you knew that wasn't well. And it's interesting because that topic, your books are often very humorous. I mean, almost always humorous. And that one doesn't seem like you can be that funny about earthquakes and disasters.
Well, that's true, but you wouldn't necessarily think for Fuzz or Grunt that there'd be a lot of humor there. There's always elements.
That's important to you to find the humor in these things. I guess humor is a big. I mean, I can just tell in your personality you're just naturally a funny person, but is that's a very important part for you? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's I think it's something readers have kind of come to expect, but some books have more humor than others. I mean, some material just lends itself easily to humor, not humor at anybody's expense, but just because of the kind of surrealness of it, or the just strangeness of it, and my role in it, because I'm often kind of the bumbling idiot. A lot of times the humor is at my own expense.
Right.
But yeah, I do try to find some avenues to provide that for the reader.
That's interesting. So the humor really comes into sort of like the self-deprecating kind of approach, right? To it, like you. Yeah. Is that your approach? Like I'm the everybody else is a super expert, and I'm just like this reporter trying to figure out stuff. Yeah. I
mean, I'm very, very aware that I'm not the expert. I'm the people that I'm talking to are the expert, and I'm often sort of struggling to keep up with the science because I don't have a background. So but sometimes that's where the humor comes from. It's
I like it makes it better because it makes you the every like if you were a real science writer, then it might be pretty dense. But I love that as you're discovering it, you're explaining it to us, and then for us non-science people, you're like, wow. Well, let's talk about Packing for Mars for Kids. So this is an adaptation of a book that you wrote called Packing for Mars. Why did you decide to to adapt that book for kids, and why that book? You could have adapted, I guess, a number of the books.
Well, my publisher, I've had the same publisher all along, W.W. Norton, and for a long time they didn't have a young readers, they call it young readers division, and now they do. So they approached me, and the one that seemed like the best fit was Packing for Mars. I mean, space is of interest to kids, and I have a sensibility that's not far off from a 12-year-old. But yeah, there could have been others. This was kind of the one we thought, well, let's start here and see how it goes. I'll probably at some point do others. Probably not Bonk.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe not the Cadaver. Well, I know the Cadavers one might.
Well, I guess that's actually one
that grosses them out.
Because it's that book is on the reading list of lots of high schools. So
interesting.
Middle school's not that far off, and when you do an adaptation, you're going from 80,000 words to 20 for that age group. So you can just leave out anything that's a little problematic or, overly technical or overly gross. Although for that age group, is
They
there
love gross.
anything? There's nothing
No, I mean,
overly gross.
they're the
That's the,
grossest. I have a 12-year-old.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I
exactly. That's the stuff
um
you leave in.
yeah. Well, so one thing I loved about this book is that it's in some ways it's written for me, because I'm not a big like space geek nerd. Like I was sort of, I think maybe I went through a little period where I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a little kid, but I don't read. That's not what I usually turn to. So you explained a lot of things to me that I just never thought about, or in a way that I could understand them. Because whenever I hear scientists talk about space, my mind just goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the really interesting thing is just the sort of challenge of gravity that humans in gravity. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
talk about that. We don't think about this, that like before people actually went into space, scientists had to figure out, what would happen to their bodies in zero gravity.
Yeah. 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 I know it was so interesting the early, I mean, before any humans went up, there was this extended period of hand wringing of scientists just going, well, gravity is one of the fundamental forces of the universe. And if you take, and we evolved in Earth gravity. So everything about us is built for Earth gravity. So if you take that away, what's going to happen? I mean, there was the potential for any number of bodily systems to just fail. I mean,
Right.
and truly lots of systems, like electrical systems, toilets. I mean, that are designed for Earth gravity don't work in
Mhm.
zero gravity. So it was logical to think that there might be systems. I mean, so what happened was there were at least, you can simulate weightlessness. You can do what's called a parabolic flight, where the plane goes on this roller coaster trajectory, and as it goes over and down, you've got like 20 seconds where you are floating. You're basically falling, but for the purposes of the testing
Yeah.
bodily systems, it's the same. So they had these, they give cadets lots of water and put them on one of those flights to see if they could initiate urination. They were having even I think even up to through John Glenn had to be looking at an eye chart to make sure the eyeball didn't change shape, and
Mm.
he was able to read the little, Snellen eye chart. So all of there was a lot of monkeys going up and heart rates being measured.
Yeah. What
And
happened to Albert the monkey? I didn't realize he was the first
yeah, well,
creature to go into.
there was Albert 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and
There
at a
was a lot of
certain point,
Alberts.
and things didn't go well for the Alberts, so finally it changed. It
Oh,
was
poor
Michael and
Albert.
Patricia were the Alberts. They were, I should say, they were unconscious, so they felt no pain. But anyway, but yes, a lot of that was to testing heart rate and blood pressure. There wasn't a lot they could do remotely at that time from space, but they wanted to see what happens to these primates when we take away gravity. I mean, that was the early part of the early Mercury and Gemini flights was, let's see how people do up there, and let's see how they do and things like, well, they're not going to be able to bathe, so let's see what happens when people don't
Yeah.
bathe for 2 weeks. So there were these space cabin simulators, and they would put students in and say, you can't bathe for 2 weeks. And the students would initially be like, big deal. But then they like realize they'd be wearing a spacesuit, a pressure suit, sleeping in it. And I mean, it's disgusting. And every time they'd move, it would waft the smelly air up their noses. And
Oh God.
a lot of them didn't make it
A
through
lot of
the simulation.
So you took one of these flights with reduced gravity. You
Yes.
go to this reduced gravity office, which is funny
Yeah.
that there's like this this
Yes.
head on the door, the reduced gravity office.
Office. You're picturing, secretaries and coffee pots
Yeah.
floating through the air.
Everybody is
Yeah.
floating, and you
Yeah.
flew with a crew. Was that one of those flights that goes? What do they
Yeah.
call those? The flights that go up and down.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
tell us about that a little bit, and what that experience was.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was incredibly fun, and it was NASA. They still do have it was called a student opportunities program, and student flight opportunities, something like that. Anyway, it was aerospace students. A lot of them were aerospace. Some were biomed, and they could apply to do a project, an experiment on one of those zero gravity flights. And that each one could bring a reporter along. And so I managed to be that reporter. It took some convincing because NASA had very specific definitions of what a reporter is, and I didn't fit them. So it took me a while to get on.
What were their definitions like? Did you have to be a
full-time? You needed to be a full-time reporter for a radio, television, newspaper.
Oh wow!
One of those basically was it, and I'm not. So somebody eventually, I called in a favor, and somebody called them up, and
right.
One public affairs person called another public affairs person, and they said, okay. And, but, I understandably, I wasn't a very good reporter for this team. I forget where they were from, and they were doing a test of some electromagnetic docking device. And of course, I'm just floating around going, my notepad said, whee.
that was your notes?
Yes, my notes. And I was like testing my space pen. Whoa, it really works.
So did you get nauseous at all? And we're going to talk about nausea.
No, I didn't, because NASA has very good drugs. They give you a combination of, the patch, the scope patch, scopolamine, and it's a combination of that and dexedrine too. So because scope makes you drowsy, and it's a pretty big dose. Yeah. So they mix the dexedrine in to keep you awake. So it was great.
You were drugged up a little bit. Yeah.
So you're drugged up a little bit. Yeah. And that's a good thing, because there was one kid who was sick before we even started doing the roller coaster.
That would have been me. Yeah. That's all I can think of is like how sick I would be on that thing.
Well, I'm the kind of person, I watch a handheld film and it makes me nauseous. I have to just start staring at the floor. Okay. Like, what was that? Children of the, what's that one? I can't remember that movie. It came out a few years ago. It was a beautiful film, but I'm just like, I'm just staring at the floor of the movie theater.
Right.
I can't watch this.
Yeah, I'm the boring parent that goes to the amusement parks with my kids and can't go on any of the rides and just wait.
But you'd be fine. You'd be fine. Those are some damn fine drugs.
Yeah, those sound like really good drugs. Yeah. So what was it like? Because you said that weightlessness wasn't exactly like, a lot of people say it's like, oh, you're, the feeling of when you're in water, when you're in a pool in the deep end and you're floating. But that's not really what you said the experience was like.
No, it's better than that. I mean, it's very cool to float in water, but in water you feel the water supporting you, and you feel the resistance. And when you're weightless, you're like a soap bubble. You have no weight. And what's cool is that all of your organs inside you don't have any weight, and your hair doesn't have weight, and you kind of don't think about, or you're not aware that there's like a subtle feeling of that physicality, and then suddenly that's gone, and it's just incredibly relaxing and almost physically euphoric. You're just floating. It's hard to well, I just did describe it, but it's hard to get across how delightful that is. And also just to be able, although NASA tries to prevent this, they have you holding a tether. By the last, I think that we did 22 up and down cycles. So you have 22 spans of about 20 seconds of weightlessness. And by the time I knew we had about 3 more, I just thought, fuck it, I'm not going to hold on to the tether. And I just like did that thing where your feet are up on the top of the wall and you just push off and Superman across.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah, it was incredibly fun. However, the NASA people grounded me quickly. They
got in trouble.
They just like, but at least I got away with it.
This is why we wanted a real report or whatever up there.
Exactly. But I knew we shouldn't have let you on board.
So, well, I don't want to keep talking about getting nauseous, but I am fascinated with this because this poor guy, you talk about this guy, Rusty Schweikart.
Yeah, Rusty Schweikart. Yeah.
It was like, because a lot of times, like we always think that, these guys who go up there, and it's mainly guys, but sometimes it's women too, who go up there, are like these superhumans, and they are in a lot of ways, but that don't like get sick and there is a kind of machismo around like not getting sick that you mentioned. And there's this device, this human disorientation device that they go on so that they can, I don't know, what is that? I was fascinated by that. What is that?
Well, that was a device, in Pensacola, Florida, at the university there was a program where they were specifically studying space motion sickness, because it was a problem. I mean, most astronauts get that. And the reason is that, your body determines your orientation by, there's these little calcium rocks inside your ear, and they trigger these little hairs. So when you're standing upright or sitting upright, they come to rest down here. If you lie down, they're over here, and that tells your brain how you're oriented. And in zero gravity, they just float in the middle and kind of ding around.
Right.
And that makes you pretty sick. Most astronauts get pretty sick. In the beginning, a lot of them didn't admit it.
Right.
Rusty Schweiker, because one of the spacewalks almost had to be canceled because of how sick he was, he kind of became the poster boy for it. He was the first person to say, all right, look, I was really sick.
Super nauseous.
Yeah. And so then the taboo was sort of gone from that point on. It was a known thing that it doesn't mean you're not macho. Everybody gets this, or almost everyone. But he was the first, and he didn't. I don't believe he flew again after that flight, where he was very sick, and it was right before he was supposed to go out on a spacewalk outside the vehicle to test the life support backpack, I believe it was, and it was a touch and go as to whether he was going to be able to do it, and that's expensive, to not. I mean, that was one of the things they had to do on that mission, and for that not to happen on schedule would have been huge. And he was like, I single-handedly, because of my nausea and puking, I'm going to make us, the United States, miss the deadline, to put a man on the moon by the end of the year. So it was a big deal for him. And he's very good natured. I've met him, and I have a emesis basin. Do you know what that is?
A what?
Emesis basin. That is a little container that they give you in the hospital that you throw up in if you're lying in bed. Anyway, I have one signed by Rusty Schweiker.
That's awesome.
I could show it to you. I can dig it out somewhere. That's his claim to. Yeah, I mean, he actually now is involved in trying to come up with ways to protect the Earth in the case of an asteroid hit. So he's. Oh wow. He does a lot of good work, and he's not just a puke. He's not just a puking astronaut. No.
What do you do? So that was one thing that you talk about, is that NASA had to figure out, what do you do with the puke? Like where like if you puke in your helmet, I mean, if you puke in your helmet, you can swallow it and it could kill you.
Worse than that, you could inhale it. What happens when you don't have gravity, the next force that comes in is surface tension. So if you were to throw up a little blob or big blob of vomit, that's going to hover around a little bit, and then it tends to, with either your face or the visor, it's going to kind of stick there, and you can't reach your hand up and push it away from your nose. And often blobs tend to go into concave surfaces, like the nostril. Am I getting it right? Concave, convex. But anyway, nostrils, mouths, like indentations. So if you have this blob of vomit covering your nose or your mouth, or getting in your eye and temporarily blinding you, that's bad news. The suits now have airflow that would direct it down away from your face. But there was a concern that the visor, you could be temporarily blinded because you couldn't see out the visor. Right. And if you're on a spacewalk, it's not just that you can't enjoy the view of Earth, you've got a job that you're supposed to be doing. You need to be able to see. So NASA was pretty concerned about that, and
they figured it out.
I think one of the materials I've seen used for simulated vomit was Progresso vegetable soup.
So they would use that as their.
That would be the simulant. Yes, that would be the simulant.
I feel like I grew up with Progresso vegetable soup. I don't think the Progresso people would be very. This podcast brought to you by Progresso vegetable soup. So the other thing, from vomit to poop, Because hey, this is a book for kids, and like you said, kids like gross out stuff.
Yeah.
But it's also really interesting because it's like one of those things you know. I have thought like, what do how do astronauts poop in space, and how does that work? Because doesn't it float up? And this was like a legitimate problem that went through many
Yeah.
iterations of, and you kind of take us through the iterations of how to deal with, with having to go to the bathroom in space, and I mean, early on, I'm sorry, this is the time where you can turn this off if this is grossing you out too much. But I find it fascinating. I mean, early on, it was like you had to reach into your, like, talk about the sort of evolution and how they eventually what they figured out.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, the first capsules were too small to have any kind of toilet. Uh, the Gemini, Mercury, and Apollo, you didn't have a bathroom. You didn't have a toilet. You had what was called a fecal bag.
Mhm.
And this was pretty much what it sounds like. It was like a clear plastic bag with a couple of adhesive strips that you would stick it to your butt. And it and the thing, without gravity, I mean, normally you sit on a toilet and the weight of
Right,
the weight of the material, as NASA would
right.
call it,
It
the turd would
sticks down.
yeah, the more it comes out, the heavier it gets, and that pulls it away and down into the water. Well, you don't have none of that in zero gravity, so it's just kind of hovering there. So not only were you dealing with this bag, but it had a little, they called it a finger cot. And you put your finger in there and you coax the material into the bag away from your body. And even then you weren't done. You had to take this packet, it was kind of like a soy sauce packet, if I recall correctly. And you had to like mix that, it's a germicide, because if there were active bacteria, the bag could, eventually the bacteria will be outgassing and the bag could explode. So you had to mix this antibacterial into the poop, mix it around, and then seal it, fold the top over it, seal it. And it was a very distasteful process. And sometimes bits escaped. They're called escapees, and that was a problem. Then you can see in the mission transcript, and I found places because the mission transcripts are searchable, of course, by
Mhm.
Control F, and you can find places where like one of the astronauts is like, "Whose is that?
Oh
Oh
God.
my God, there's somebody hand me a napkin. There's a turd floating around in here." So they had a good sense of humor about it, but in fact, it was a real morale buster. The capsule stank. It was a difficult process. Nobody looked forward to it, and
You said that a lot of people, like sometimes the astronauts wouldn't even eat because they didn't want
right, they wouldn't eat, and the food was actually designed to constipate you. That was it was highly processed, not a
to.
lot of fiber. So and that was the hope that you could, especially on those short flights. Some of the early Gemini flights were a few days, and you could make it the whole time without using the dreaded fecal bag.
Sounds
But
like my son going to high school. He never uses the bathroom in high school. He holds it in all day.
oh geez, yeah,
Remember
yeah,
that? Remember those days?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Um,
God, yeah, that's
so
not good. It makes you
not good. It's not
constipated,
healthy.
dries it out. Yeah.
So
So
eventually,
eventually, yeah, they had to come up with a design for a toilet, and we don't need to go into a ton of detail here, but the whole thing had to be rethought. So you didn't have water coming, you didn't have water and gravity, which is what you need for an Earth toilet. So it's based on airflow that kind of entrains the material. Sometimes NASA, well, in some of their papers, they called it the contribution.
they have the best euphemisms in NASA.
They do. They do. So the contribution. So there was airflow. There were these holes right around where you sit, and that would kind of like blow it down, kind of encourage it to go down and away from your body, and that would give you good separation. And that was the holy grail of the NASA toilet: good separation. Get it away from your body, because
Right. There's like these
gravity.
kind of like these air suction.
Yeah, yeah,
Right, that you hook up.
right. Right. So you wanted to just get
Vacuum.
it away from the body. And the toilets, the seats were even designed. I mean, there was, I think, some flap about a $5,000 NASA toilet seat. Well, part of, I mean, they had to redesign the seat so that it naturally spread the cheeks. So there was less surface tension. So the material would not stick to the sides of your asshole, basically. So there was like a cheek spreading toilet seat.
Wow.
Yeah, there were all manner of challenges with that
Yeah.
toilet. And then it had to be tested, which means taking it up on that zero gravity flight that we talked about earlier. And as I mentioned, there's about 20 seconds at a time where you're weightless. So that put quite a performance burden on
Yeah. You
the
have 20
person.
seconds to go. Right.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
And you're already
Yeah.
constipated.
Right. So that didn't work out well. And that meant that somebody at NASA had to design a high fidelity fecal simulant, which happened.
You mentioned bathing. I didn't totally understand how people bathe in space. Do they bathe in space?
Well, they don't take
There's no
showers.
shower.
They tried to do showers, and it was a disaster because the water, you have lots of little water blobs that end up, you have to chase them down the spacecraft and, find them before they short something out. So although they really wanted to find a shower system that would work, it just didn't. So they use wet naps.
Right.
What do you call them? The wipes.
Yeah, wipes. Okay.
Moistened wipes. They use those, and they use, I think, a dry kind of shampoo.
Okay. So it's not too sticky, but I bet it's not the best smelling.
No, I don't think it is likely to be very. But after a while, you don't smell it. But I wanted I actually asked NASA if they would, when the shuttle, this was during shuttle, the last few shuttle flights. I said, when the shuttle lands, could I sniff it as the doors open? And they're like, no. No, you totally cannot.
Only Mary only Mary Roach to sniff the
shuttle. Yeah, they're like, yeah. It was after a while, the public affairs office got pretty tired of me.
Well, okay. So packing for Mars, I want to talk about just Mars in general, because because I feel like we've accelerated that since your first book came out, that process. And is your feeling that this is important, that we eventually get to Mars? Like, knowing what you know now, why is that such an important feat for mankind?
I think it's one of those things where the importance of it might not be obvious. And we're talking about sending people to Mars rather than landers. I mean, landers can tell you a lot about the formation of the planet and whether or not there was water and what is going on there. You can do a lot of that robotically. So the question becomes, why send people? And there are different views on that. It is obviously a very expensive undertaking. I would love to see it be an international effort where everybody I think it is a wonderful way to just sort of bring nations together and to have people excited about the same rather major milestone. But as to, how do you justify the expense? I think it's, it's kind of like the example I gave in the book was when the very first balloon flights, the first time there were people in a balloon, like up, higher than the height of a building. Somebody asked, I think it was Benjamin Franklin. It's the kind of thing that gets attributed to half a dozen people. But anyway, someone asked in the source that I saw, it was Benjamin Franklin, said, what is the point of this? And he said, you may as well ask, what is the point of a newborn baby? In other words, you don't know what this baby will grow up to do. You know, what things will come from this. So, the Wright brothers' first flight was pretty pathetic. Across a cornfield or whatever. Nobody, I mean, it was amazing that they're able to do it, but nobody
could imagine what it could be.
Could imagine where that would lead. So I guess that's how I feel about it. And also I'm just a sucker for, people pulling together just to do something incredible just because they can do it. And it's inspiring it inspires a lot of young people to go into science, to respect science. I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of abstract benefits of it. There are also inevitably there's a ton of technology that comes out of that. things that challenges that have to be met. And that's all kinds of engineering, creativity. What?
Would you ever go to Mars, do you think? Do you think that would be a book? Hanging out on Mars for a year.
I would love to go to the moon, but Mars, unless they come up with some sort of like nuclear propulsion that would get you there faster, I really think I'm the last person to put in a small space with other people. I'm not that patient.
Right. Okay.
And I would really miss blue sky and breezes and the smells of flowers. I don't know. I'm pretty fond of this planet.
Yeah,
so I'd live vicariously through whoever wants to go.
Right. What is your take on what's happening with like Elon Musk and all these billionaires going into space? Do you think it's a good thing? Like the penis rocket that
it's such a huge amount of money, and I'd love for it to be. I'd love for that sum of money to be spent on some problems here on Earth, but it's their money, and that's what they're going to do with it, and it's better than gambling it. I mean, it could be worse. It's exciting. The prospect of seeing people on Mars, in my lifetime would be pretty amazing. I'd love to see it, but ultimately, I think the money could be so much better spent on Earth. And I'd love to see it'd be nice if it was an international effort among all these different space agencies. So it would kind of pull people together at a time when people seem to be drifting apart. But it's complicated.
Yeah. Are you already working on your next book?
I am. Yeah.
I know it's a secret, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's a book.
It's a book. How long does it take you to write those books generally?
At least a couple of years.
Wow.
A lot of setting stuff up and going places. And
do you have help? Do you do it kind of all on your own?
No, I don't. I do it because I ultimately really enjoy the research. And no, I don't. I sometimes hire, I'll hire a translator or an interpreter, depending on where I'm going. I may hire somebody to do, I like to find some Senate subcommittee hearings from the 60s, something where I'm like, I don't know that system, and this person does. So, but I don't travel with an assistant. No, I don't.
And so is that your process first? You just completely research the topic. Do you go and do the things you need to do, kind of, get on whatever you need to do personally where you need to be there. And you get that all down and then you kind of put it all together and write the book? Or are you writing the book?
No, I'm writing. As soon as I have enough material for a chapter, I'll write it, even though I don't know where it's going to go and I may need to rewrite it later. I try to be writing as soon as I can. Otherwise, just this massive pile. Yeah, it's not as fresh. Also, you have this massive, intimidating pile of folders and research that all has to be written. So I like to start writing as soon as I can. But I'm always writing and setting something up at the same time. So I'm doing a mix of things on any given day. Right now I'm not writing because I haven't got enough material for any one chapter quite yet. But and so the beginning is a lot of contacting people and trying to get access and trying to figure out what exactly is in the book, because even though I've sold the book and said that I'll be doing these things, I'm often changing my mind instantly. And
also, you don't know necessarily if you are going to get the access you say.
Exactly. Yeah. So the outline is shifting every month. Yeah.